The final swirl of chocolate frosting on the cake was perfect. I stood back, admiring my work in the warm light of my Ann Arbor kitchen. 28 years. It felt like only yesterday I was teaching Leo how to ride a bike in this very backyard, his small hands gripping the handlebars with fierce determination. Now, he was a man. Well, legally a man. In practice, he still needed a push, and I believed, with all my fatherly heart, that this party was part of that gentle push toward responsibility. My late wife, Eleanor, would have loved this. She would have arranged a catered affair, but I insisted on making the cake myself. It felt more honest. With the cake finished, I retrieved the real gift from its hiding place in my study. A vintage wristwatch, its leather strap worn smooth with time. It had belonged to my grandfather, a man who built his life from nothing. Then it was passed to my father, and then to me on my own 28th birthday. It wasn't just a timepiece, it was a legacy, a symbol of the hard work and integrity I hoped Leo would one day understand. Tucking the wrapped box under my arm, I carefully lifted the heavy cake. It was time. I slid open the kitchen door that led to the backyard deck. The April evening was mild for Michigan, carrying the scent of grilled burgers from the Weber and the sharp, hoppy smell of local craft beer. Laughter drifted from the deck, Leo's voice the loudest among them, confident and animated. I saw him standing near the grill with his usual crew, Kyle and Josh, while his girlfriend Chloe scrolled through her phone at a patio table. I paused, not wanting to interrupt, a smile forming on my face. This was good. He was happy. Then, through the glass, Kyle's voice carried clearly. "Man, your dad really went all out for this party." I leaned in slightly, my smile widening, ready to hear my son's acknowledgement. Instead, Leo took a long swig from his bottle, his voice dripping with a familiar, weary sarcasm. "Yeah, well, he's trying to buy my affection, as usual. Thinks money solves everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. The cake in my hands, once a symbol of love, suddenly felt like a block of concrete. The heirloom under my arm burned with a cold shame. Before I could process the initial sting, the final, brutal wish came. "Honestly, guys," Leo said, his voice dropping into a tone of mock confidence, "the best gift for me would be if the old man finally disappeared from my life forever. I'm tired of his lectures and his control." My breath caught in my chest. The world seemed to fall silent, the laughter and music fading into a dull roar. All that existed was that one cruel, thoughtless wish hanging in the Michigan air like a death sentence. For a long moment I stood there, frozen in the doorway, a 62-year-old man holding a birthday cake for a son who wished I didn't exist. The cheerful sounds of the party, the music, the laughter, the clinking bottles all faded into a dull, distant roar. The weight of the cake in my hands was immense, each ounce a testament to a love that was clearly unrequited. Memories flooded my mind, not the happy ones of bike rides and bedtime stories, but the more recent, stinging ones. Leo's college graduation, where he'd introduced me to his friends not as his father, but as the guy who pays for everything. The Christmas morning when he'd unwrapped the expensive laptop I'd saved for months to buy, only to give a cursory nod before returning to his phone. Had I been this blind for 28 years, mistaking tolerance for affection and dependency for love? The hurt was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest. But as I retreated back into the silence of the kitchen, it began to crystallize into something else. Something harder, colder, and far more precise. I carefully placed the birthday cake on the granite countertop. The 28 candles I'd planned to put on it remained in the drawer. Then, I set the wrapped gift, the family heirloom, on the kitchen table. They were symbols of a relationship that, I now realized, only existed in my own mind. I was no longer a heartbroken father. I was an engineer who had just discovered a catastrophic, systemic failure, and I knew with a sudden and chilling certainty that it required a complete system overhaul. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked back towards the deck. No cake, no gift, just a singular, grim purpose. I didn't hesitate this time. I walked straight through the circle of his friends, the barbecue smoke parting before me. "Leo," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their conversation like a razor. "We need to talk." He turned, his face a mask of casual indifference, the same look he'd worn when I confronted him about using my credit card for online gambling. "Dad, whatever you think you heard, it's true," he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "You're interfering with my life, and everyone here knows it." His friends, Kyle and Josh, nodded in solemn agreement, as if he'd just uttered some profound truth. Before I could respond, a sharp voice cut in. "Leo Arthur Davis." It was Margaret, my late wife's younger sister. She had come to the party to represent the family, a formidable woman with Eleanor's same steel spine. She pushed through the group, her eyes blazing. "How dare you speak to your father that way? After everything he has done for you? Your mother would be utterly heartbroken to hear you." She stood between us, a bastion of decency in a sea of disrespect. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of shame in Leo's eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by arrogance, fueled by the beer in his hand and the sycophantic audience around him. Leo scoffed, a truly ugly sound that held no humor. He waved a dismissive hand at his aunt. "Stay out of this, Aunt Margaret. You're from a different generation, you just don't get it." The cruelty of it, dismissing a woman who had shown him nothing but kindness his entire life, was breathtaking. He then turned his attention back to me, the ultimate source of his problems. His friends Kyle and Josh flanked him like a king's guard, smirking. "You want gratitude for stuff I never even asked for," Leo sneered, his words slurring slightly. "That's your problem, not mine." From the patio table I heard his girlfriend, Chloe, let out a little giggle, a sound like glass breaking. The humiliation was absolute, a public spectacle for an audience of 20-somethings who were drinking my beer on my deck. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. Words were part of the old methodology, the one that had clearly failed. I simply looked at my son, a long, cold, analytical stare, before turning my back on him and the circle of mockery. "I'm leaving, Arthur," Margaret said, her voice tight with disgust as she passed me. Eleanor would be spinning in her grave. I nodded, then walked into the house and up the stairs, the sound of Leo's triumphant laughter following me like a persistent ghost. I closed my bedroom door, and the silence was a relief. The muffled beat of the music from downstairs was a distant problem, one I was about to solve. I stood in the middle of the room, not in despair, but in a state of profound, chilling clarity. The part of my brain that felt a father's love and pain had gone offline. The engineer had taken over. For 3 decades, my job had been to analyze complex systems, identify malfunctioning components, and implement efficient solutions. I now saw my life in exactly those terms. Variable, Leo's unchecked entitlement. Constraint, my own home and resources being used to finance my own disrespect. Desired outcome, a permanent end to the systemic dysfunction. The current approach, patience, generosity, unconditional support, had been a catastrophic failure. It was time for a new methodology. I walked to the window and looked down at the scene. My son, the birthday boy, was gesturing animatedly with a fresh beer, the center of attention on a stage I had built and paid for. And the solution became elegantly, brutally simple. You don't fix a malfunctioning component that refuses to be fixed. You remove the environment that allows it to malfunction. You cut the power source. I turned from the window, my movements now precise and deliberate. I was no longer a father retreating from a party. I was an engineer on his way to solve a problem. I descended the stairs with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The house no longer felt like a home filled with memories, but an asset, a piece of property whose resources were being misused. I walked through the kitchen and out onto the deck, moving directly toward the small table where the sound system was set up. I didn't look at anyone. I simply reached down, my hand perfectly steady, and twisted the volume knob counterclockwise until the blaring music cut out. The sudden, absolute silence was more jarring than any shout could have been. Conversations sputtered and died. Every head in the yard, perhaps 20 in all, turned toward me. I picked up the wireless microphone from the table. It felt cool and solid in my hand. I raised it to my lips, and my voice, amplified and devoid of any emotion, echoed across the property. "The party is over," I announced. I am asking everyone to please leave my property now. A wave of confused murmuring went through the crowd. Leo, his face flushed with a mixture of beer and rage, stepped forward. "Nobody's going anywhere," he declared, not to me, but to his friends. "This is my party. Don't listen to him." I kept the microphone raised. "This is my property. I have the legal right to decide who is on it. You have 5 minutes to leave voluntarily. After that, anyone still present will be considered a trespasser." The word trespasser hung in the air, changing the atmosphere from a family squabble to something far more serious. Several guests on the far side of the lawn began gathering their things, clearly wanting no part of this. But Leo, emboldened by his core group of enablers, stood his ground. "Dad, put the microphone down and stop embarrassing yourself," he commanded, as if I were a misbehaving child. Kyle and Josh flanked him, their expressions defiant. "Seriously, Mr. A, don't ruin his birthday," Kyle said, trying to sound reasonable. I placed the microphone carefully back on the table. My gaze swept across the deck, locking onto my son's eyes. He crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. "We're not going anywhere," he said, his voice full of the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. "Very well," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Though I knew he heard me, I turned my back on him, on all of them, and walked into the kitchen. Through the large window over the sink, I could see them laughing, believing they had won, that my threat was just the blustering of a powerless old man. I picked up the receiver of the wall-mounted phone, a relic from another era that I'd never bothered to remove. With the methodical precision of an engineer inputting a command sequence, I pressed the 3 buttons that would trigger an irreversible system correction. 9, 1, 1. "Ann Arbor 911, what is your emergency?" a calm voice asked. I gave her my address, my voice as steady and neutral as hers. "I have a number of individuals trespassing on my property," I reported. "They have refused to leave after being asked." I remained in the kitchen, watching through the window as the scene unfolded exactly as I had calculated. The dispatcher had told me officers would arrive within 15 minutes. It took less than 10. The first sign was the silent, sweeping wash of red and blue lights that painted the backyard in strobing flashes of consequence. The last vestiges of laughter died instantly. A hush fell over the remaining guests as 2 uniformed Ann Arbor police officers entered through the side gate. They moved with a calm authority that immediately commanded the space, their presence a stark, sobering reality in what had been, just moments before, a bubble of youthful arrogance. One was a tall, stern-faced man in his 40s. The other, a woman whose expression made it clear she had no time for nonsense. I stepped out onto the deck, holding my driver's license and a copy of the property deed I'd retrieved while waiting. "Officers, I'm Arthur Davis," I said, meeting their approach. "I'm the homeowner. Thank you for your prompt response." I explained the situation concisely. A private party, a request for guests to leave, and their refusal to comply. The taller officer, whose name tag read Miller, nodded, his eyes scanning the handful of defiant guests still clustered around my son. His partner, Officer Gark, stepped forward and addressed the group. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an official weight that was impossible to ignore. "This is private property. The owner has withdrawn his consent for you to be here. You are all required to leave the premises immediately. Failure to do so is criminal trespassing." The legal terminology had a powerful effect. Chloe, Leo's girlfriend, was the first to protest. "But Leo lives here. He invited us." Officer Gark's response was a masterclass in patient legal correction. "Ma'am, for the record, an adult child living in their parents' home does not have the legal right to authorize guests when the legal property owner has explicitly asked them to leave. You are trespassing." That was it. The argument was over. The legal reality was a brick wall their sense of entitlement couldn't break through. The remaining guests, seeing that their host had no actual authority, began to disperse, grabbing jackets and bags, avoiding eye contact as they shuffled toward the gate. Only Leo, flanked by his loyal disciples, Kyle and Josh, remained. A stubborn, foolish island of defiance. "This is my home too," Leo said to Officer Miller, his voice a petulant whine. "You can't arrest me for being in my own house." Officer Miller had clearly reached his professional limit. He took a deliberate step toward my son. "Sir, this is your final warning. Leave the property now, or you will be placed under arrest." For one insane moment, I saw Leo's jaw tighten, his pride overriding any shred of common sense. He crossed his arms. "I'm not going anywhere." Officer Miller didn't waste another word. "Turn around. Place your hands behind your back." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs closing around Leo's wrists echoed across the now silent deck. It was the most definitive sound I had ever heard, a final, punctuating end to 28 years of enabling. As the patrol car's red and blue lights disappeared down the street, Leo's final, hate-filled words still echoed in the silent backyard. "I will never forgive you for this." He had screamed it from the back of the car, his face a contorted mask of rage and disbelief. Hours ago, those words would have shattered me. Now, they felt like nothing more than a final data point, confirming the correctness of my decision. The problem had been identified, isolated, and removed from the system. Chloe was sobbing near the deflated birthday balloons, while Kyle and Josh stood frozen, the bravado completely drained from their faces. The party was over. The silence in my house that night was absolute. The next morning, I brewed coffee, in a home that felt entirely my own for the first time in years. There was no booming bass from the upstairs bedroom, no passive-aggressive complaints about the brand of coffee I bought. There was only peace. I sat at the kitchen table and made a call to the Washtenaw County Clerk's office. With the case number an officer had provided, I inquired about the disposition of one Leo Arthur Davis. The clerk's voice was professionally monotone. "Criminal trespassing and failure to comply with a lawful order. He's been sentenced to the mandatory minimum. 14 days. The number was perfect. A clean 2-week operational window, free of any potential interference. The system correction was proceeding precisely on schedule." With the timeline confirmed, I opened my laptop. I didn't navigate to folders of old family photos. I opened a new spreadsheet. For the next 3 hours, I conducted a forensic accounting of the last 5 years of my son's life. I researched the average cost to rent a room in Ann Arbor. I pulled up old utility bills, grocery receipts, car insurance statements, and credit card records detailing the countless emergency cash infusions. The numbers were stark, unemotional, and damning. Conservatively, it had cost me over $30,000 a year to subsidize Leo's extended adolescence. $150,000 over 5 years. This wasn't a financial ledger of parental love. It was the documented cost of my own humiliation. The investment had yielded a profoundly negative return. It was time to liquidate the primary asset. I didn't waste a moment. My research was swift and targeted. Top real estate agents, Ann Arbor fast sale. A name appeared with dozens of glowing reviews. Michelle Johnson. The testimonials were filled with the exact words I was looking for. Efficient, aggressive, professional, closed in 10 days. She was the perfect instrument for the next phase of the operation. I dialed the number from her website. When a confident professional voice answered, I was ready. "Miss Johnson," I said, my tone as businesslike as hers. "My name is Arthur Davis. I need to sell my house on Elm Street, and I need it sold in under 2 weeks." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Michelle Johnson's voice returned, a new edge of professional curiosity in it. "Under 2 weeks is an aggressive timeline, Mr. Davis. May I ask what's driving the urgency?" I met her in her downtown office an hour later. It was a space of clean lines, glass, and steel, reflecting the efficiency I was counting on. I laid out the property documents on her polished desk. "Family circumstances require a rapid liquidation of assets," I stated, using the cold, impersonal language of business. She nodded, her expression unreadable. She understood that her job was not to pry, but to perform. After reviewing the details, she named a competitive listing price. "Excellent," I said. "I'll agree to that. However, I want to ensure this sale is your absolute top priority." I leaned forward slightly. "I'm prepared to offer you your standard commission, plus a $5,000 cash bonus, if we have a signed, legally binding contract within the next 7 days. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, lit up with a spark of pure professional hunger. Mr. Davis, she said with a smile, you have my undivided attention. Michelle Johnson was not merely efficient. She was a force of nature. Professional photographs were taken the very next morning. The online listing, complete with a virtual tour, was live by noon. An open house was scheduled for Saturday and Sunday. The response was, in her words, overwhelming. My well-maintained brick colonial in a desirable Ann Arbor neighborhood attracted exactly the right kind of attention. By Saturday evening, we had 3 solid offers, all over the asking price. But one stood out. It was a full cash offer, $10,000 above list, with all contingencies waived. The buyers were a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, both doctors relocating for positions at the University of Michigan Hospital. They needed to close and move in as soon as possible. They were the perfect buyers, the perfect instrument to complete my plan. The closing was scheduled for the following Thursday, the day before Leo's scheduled release. The process was a whirlwind of legal documentation, a blur of signatures and initials. I sat at a long conference table at the title company, directly across from the Chens. Their faces were luminous with the joy and anxiety of buying their first family home. I felt a strange, profound sense of detachment as I signed page after page. Each stroke of the pen was a calculated, deliberate act, severing another tie to my past. I was signing away the kitchen where Eleanor and I had hosted countless holidays, the living room where I had taught Leo to read, the backyard where a worn patch of grass still marked the spot a tire swing once hung. I felt no wave of nostalgia, no pang of regret. I felt only the cool, quiet satisfaction of a complex machine operating flawlessly. When I pushed the final document across the table, the deed transfer, it was done. The house, the very foundation of Leo's entitled world, legally and irrevocably, was no longer mine. I had 24 hours to vacate the property. I packed a single suitcase with clothes, toiletries, and the few photographs of Eleanor that I kept on my nightstand. Everything else, the furniture we'd picked out together, the books that lined the shelves of my study, the tools in my workshop, was part of the sale. An entire life reduced to what could fit in the trunk of my car. I walked next door to my neighbor of 15 years, Mr. Henderson. I kept the explanation brief and clinical. Frank, I've sold the house. It all happened very quickly, and I find myself between living situations. Would it be possible to use your guest room for a couple of nights? Frank, a kind and discreet man who missed his own late wife as much as I missed mine, agreed without a single prying question. His guest room window, I already knew, had a perfect unobstructed view of my former front porch. The observation post was now secure. That evening, in the quiet of a room that was not my own, I took out a single sheet of plain stationery and a good pen. I composed and discarded several drafts, all of them too emotional, too full of a history that no longer mattered. The engineer in me demanded efficiency, a message stripped down to its essential function. The final version was 40 words of brutal, calculated precision. Leo, it read, you said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I've decided to grant your wish. The house has been sold. You now have the independence you've always demanded. Arthur, no anger, no sadness, just a statement of fact, a problem solved. I folded it neatly and sealed it in a crisp, white envelope. The next morning, as the Chen family's moving truck was being unloaded, I walked across the lawn one last time. I introduced myself to a kind-faced Mrs. Chen amidst the chaos of boxes and furniture. My son has been traveling, I said, my voice calm and steady. He isn't aware of the sale and may stop by. I would be very grateful if you could give him this. I handed her the sealed envelope. She took it with a look of deep sympathy, assuming, I'm sure, that she was witnessing the messy aftermath of a difficult family transition. She had no idea she was a key component in a meticulously planned demolition. The trap was now set. All variables were accounted for. On Friday morning, I sat in the chair by Mr. Henderson's window, a cup of coffee in hand, and waited. At precisely 9:15, the city bus sighed to a stop at the corner. Leo stepped off. He wore the same jeans and t-shirt he'd been arrested in, and he carried his wallet and phone in the clear plastic bag the jail had given him. There was no trace of humility in his posture, no sign of reflection. He walked with the easy, entitled swagger of a prince returning to his castle, ready to complain about the quality of the coffee and sleep for 12 hours. As he turned onto our street, I saw a flicker of confusion on his face. He saw the moving truck, the unfamiliar car in the driveway, the children's bicycles on the lawn he'd always refused to mow. He shook his head as if in annoyance, clearly assuming I had allowed a new neighbor to use the driveway. He walked up the stone path, pulled out his house key, and plunged it into the lock. It didn't turn. He jiggled it, then tried again, his movements becoming more forceful, more frustrated. The first, undeniable piece of data that his universe had been fundamentally and permanently altered had just been delivered. Leo's frustration boiled over into incoherent rage. He started banging on the door with the side of his fist, shouting my name. A moment later, the door opened, and Mr. Chen stood there, his expression calm but wary. "Can I help you?" he asked in a polite, steady voice. "Who the hell are you?" Leo demanded, trying to push his way inside. "What are you doing in my house?" From my window across the street, I watched the scene unfold like a silent film, every movement freighted with meaning. Mr. Chen didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, young man, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is our house now. My family and I bought it last week." Leo let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible. My father, Arthur Davis, lives here. Now get out of my house before I call the cops on you for trespassing." Oaf! The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Just then, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, drawn by the conflict. She took in the scene with a quick maternal assessment. Leo's agitated state, his crumpled clothes, the jail-issued plastic bag in his hand. Her expression was not one of fear, but of a sad, gentle understanding. "Are you Leo?" she asked, her voice much softer than her husband's. The unexpected kindness seemed to momentarily disarm him. "Yes," he stammered. "Can someone please tell me what is going on?" Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "The previous owner, your father, he asked me to give you this." She held out the crisp, white envelope. Leo took it from her, his movements hesitant, suspicious, as if he knew on some primal level that he was accepting his own verdict. He stared at the envelope. He would have recognized my neat, block-lettered script instantly. I watched from my observation post as his fingers, trembling almost imperceptibly, tore open the seal. It was the first sign of genuine vulnerability I had seen in him in a decade. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. I knew the 40 words by heart. I watched his eyes scan the brief message. I could pinpoint the exact moment, the logic of the situation, the new family, the unworkable key, the sealed envelope breached the walls of his arrogance. His face went through a rapid, devastating series of transformations. First came confusion, his brow furrowed as if trying to decipher a complex equation. It was followed by dawning comprehension, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief. And finally, as the full, crushing weight of the new reality settled upon him, his expression morphed into one of pure, unadulterated horror. "No," he whispered, the sound too faint for me to hear but visible in the movement of his lips. "No, this can't be real." He wouldn't. His legs seemed to lose their strength, and he stumbled backward, slumping heavily against the very mailbox he had never bothered to check. The plastic bag fell from his limp grasp, spilling its pathetic contents, a wallet, a phone, a set of keys to a car he no longer had access to, onto the sidewalk. He read the note again, and then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into a different meaning. Then, a sound I hadn't heard in over 20 years escaped his throat, not a shout of anger, but a raw, ragged sob of pure loss. He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook as 28 years of unearned confidence and unpunished disrespect finally came crashing down. The lesson was complete. I watched from the window for a long time, an unseen observer to my own son's unraveling. I had expected to feel a sense of triumphant, clear-cut justice. Instead, the feeling was more complex, quieter. The engineer in me was satisfied. The system had been corrected. The malfunctioning component had been forced to confront its own errors. But the father in me, a part I thought had been silenced, felt a hollow ache. In that crumpled figure on the sidewalk, I saw not the arrogant 28-year-old man, but a fleeting image of the small boy who had once cried in my arms over a scraped knee. This sudden, unwelcome wave of paternal memory didn't change the cold logic of my decision. The lesson was necessary, the consequences were earned. But it added a layer of somber gravity to my victory. I finally turned away from the window. The operation was complete. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in a decade. The next morning, I packed my single suitcase and carried it downstairs. I thanked Mr. Henderson for his hospitality and his discretion. He simply nodded, the way good neighbors do, understanding that some family matters are best left unspoken. He wished me well on my journey. I got into my car and started the engine. I allowed myself one last look at the brick colonial house, my home for 30 years, now the Chen family's home. I did not look for Leo. I did not want to know where he had gone, or what he would do next. That was his problem to solve now, his system to engineer. That chapter of my life was permanently closed. I pulled out of Frank's driveway and pointed the car west, towards the highway, towards the coast. The car felt lighter, and so did I. The weight of a one-sided responsibility, a burden I had carried for 28 years, had finally been lifted. I thought of the money in my bank account, no longer a tool for revenge, but a foundation for a new life. A life where my generosity would be appreciated, starting with myself.